Alright you guys, so this is a very short video on how to write a fraction as a decimal. When you are being asked to write the value of a decimal or a digit in a decimal, it's going to be always represented as a fraction. And so we can say that fractions can be changed into a decimal and it'll still be the same number, just represented different ways. So the first one we're going to do is a 6/10. So if you read this as a fraction, you would say I have 6/10 or 6/10. So if I wrote that in word form, I would have 6/10. So how do I write that as a decimal? Well, I have a 6/10. So the biggest part is to understand the word form. When you say this properly, I say 6/10. So if I have tenths, that's a hint that we're working as with a decimal, right? Because if I have my place value chart, this is the tenths place. This is the hundredths. Okay, and then over here's the ones. But I have a 6/10, so I don't even have a whole. Remember, if this was a whole, it would be 10/10 because that represents one whole, because 10 divided by 10 is 1. So imagine you have a whole pizza. I don't even have a whole. I only have 6/10 slices. So think of, if you can remember that, that'll help you understand that it's a decimal because decimals are small. So I don't have a whole. I have a 0. I have almost a whole. It's 6/10. I'm really close, but I don't have a whole yet. So that's why it's a decimal and there's going to be a 0 in that ones place. But I do have a 6 sitting in the tens because I write this as 6/10. So what I always say is when you have a fraction, the number on top is going to go in the place that's written down here. So the 6 is going to go in the tenths place. And I did that. A 6 in the tenths. And I don't have any other digits, so zeros are surrounding it. So if I read this correctly, I would have 6/10. Okay? Let's try another one. What if I had 7/100? Okay, so remember, take this digit and write it in the hundredths place. So I have my decimal. I always fill in an empty number with empty values, so I make sure that I put the 7 in the right spot. So if it helps you, write this out every time. You have the tenths, then comes the hundredths, and then comes the thousandths. So it's like you're taking this number and you got to put it in the right parking spot. Well, I have a 7 in hundredths. If I said this in word form, it would be 7/100. It's a really small fraction. Imagine I only have 7 of something out of 100. It's a very small portion. It's not a whole number at all. It's smaller than a whole number. So I have a 0 in the ones place, and I have a 7 in the hundredths. So tenths, hundredths. So my 7 sits here. And then you fill the rest of the space in with zeros. And that is how you identify the decimal or fraction and relate them. So this is the same thing. I can say 7 out of 100 is the same thing as 0.07 or 7/100. 7/100. Exactly the same. Now let's work with one that has the digits in the thousands. Let's practice that first. So if I had 9/1000. So if you read this properly, you would say 9/1000. So I need a 9 in the thousandth spot, and then zeros take the rest of the spaces. The tenths, the hundredths, the thousandths. It's always important to make sure you label it if that helps you. You want just a 9 landing in the thousandths place. Okay? Now let's see what happens if I have more than just one digit. What if I have 26 out of 100? Okay, this is a little bit bigger of a decimal, and I have 2 digits on top. So here's where it can get a little tricky. But if you remember this trick or this rule, you should be golden. So let's write our decimal. I always do the tenths, hundredths, and thousandths spot to help me. So tenths, this is the hundredths, and I'm just going to abbreviate, and this is the thousandths, okay? So 26 hundredths. I have a 2 and a 6. I can't put the 2 and the 6 in the hundredth spot. That doesn't work because remember, one digit fits in one parking spot. Just like cars, one car can fit in one parking spot. You can't put both numbers in there. So then where would I put the 2 and where would I put the 6? So whenever you're working with numbers in the thousandths, tenths, hundredths after the decimal, what you're going to do is you're going to take the very last digit, which happens to be a 6 on top, and that is the digit that lands in the place that's identified at the bottom of the fraction. So this tells me a 6 must be in the hundredths place, and then whatever surrounds it in front of it, it just happens to be a 2, will go right next to it, which lands in the tenths, because remember, these are like cars. They need their own parking spot. They can't share. Okay, so the 2 landed in the tenths, and the 6 had to go in the hundredths. Because again, when I say this, I have 26 hundredths. So whatever the last digit is, that's the one that goes in this place. So let's practice that again. What if I had 79 hundredths? We'll do a hundredths again. Oops, and I'm spelling it. Oops. So if I had 79 hundredths. Okay, so remember, draw your chart, your empty chart, for the tenths, for the hundredths, and for the thousandths. And I'm abbreviating. Okay, always take the last digit. It's a 9. The 9 has to go in whatever place is down here. This is representing 100, so it's in the hundredths. So the 9 has to go there no matter what. And then fill in what's next to it. It's a 7. Now remember, I can't put a 7 in the hundredths place as well. That doesn't work. A number gets its own parking spot, so it must go right next to it, which happens to be in the tenths. So this is the same thing as 79 over 100. I can rewrite that as a decimal, writing it as decimal and 79 hundredths. Okay? Now let's do one that has a thousandths value. What if I had 425 thousandths? Okay, so remember the steps. Write your 3 spots. This is the tenths. This is the hundredths. This is the thousandths. I'm abbreviating. What's the last digit? It's the 5. Where does it go? Which parking spot does it get? It always gets the one that's indicated on the bottom. The thousandths place, because this is, the number is 1,000. So 5 in the thousandths place is right here. So this has to be the 5. And then you fill in what's left. This car, or this 2, is going to go in the next parking spot. And this 4 has to go in the next parking spot. So if I rewrote this, I'm going to say that 425 over 1,000 is the same thing as a decimal 425. Because if I read this, this is 425 thousandths. This is 425 thousandths, because that 5 is landing in the thousandths place. I'm going to do one more when we have zeros taking the place of some of the places in a place value chart. So what if I had, what if I had 208 thousandths? So nothing changes as far as where you place digits, even if there's a 0. It's really important to know that. So the last digit is an 8, and it needs to go in the thousandths place. So if you put in your spots, tenths, hundred, thousandths, the 8 has to go in the thousandths place because that's the number that's on the bottom. And then you fill in the rest. Even though it's a 0, it goes here, and then the 2 must go here. So I can say that 208 over 1,000, if that was my fraction, I can rewrite this fraction as a decimal and write it as 0.208 because this 8 is the most important thing. That's the most important car as far as what parking spot. It gets the thousandths parking